What's up, guys? If you played DPP in the late 2000s, the early 2010s, then you remember Blissey as a metagame-defining force. It was dominant, it was unwavering, it shaped a ton of the OU tier. Now, if you started playing DPP in the latter half of the 2010s, then you became familiar with the metagame in the age of Clefable. And in the modern DPP-OU metagame, Clefable is better than Blissey by a long shot. It's not close. If you are unfamiliar with Clefable and are wondering how the mighty Blissey could have been so usurped by a UU Pokemon, then I have the video for you. I made a video chronicling the rise of Clefable throughout DPP-OU to its current state as a metagame-defining force, much like Blissey was before it. So I would recommend watching that if you are unfamiliar with what Clefable does and why it's such a big deal, before you continue on with this video, because this video relies on you knowing why Clefable is such a big deal. Now, if you are familiar with why Clefable is such a big deal, then we can continue on. So you probably know that Clefable is very highly ranked in the current metagame. Well, these rankings I actually have to update. Clefable should be even higher than bottom of A+. It's really good. Yeah, it's better than Metagross, Gyarados, all these guys. It is huge. Blissey, on the other hand, sits in the bottom of A-, and I could see an argument for it being lower, even if I disagree. But the point being that a lot of players don't know just why Blissey was such a big deal and what it's capable of and why that's important. And they just think, well, why would you ever use Blissey when Clefable exists? And it's true. For the most part, Clefable is going to be a more consistent game-to-game performer, and for the most part, it is going to be doing its job better than Blissey. Like, it doesn't have to deal with lava plume burns and rocks and sand from Heatran and toxic Zapdos, things of that nature. However, in this video, we are going over why Blissey should not be slept on in DPP. There are two major team styles it fits on, and those team styles make the most of its excellent qualities. So, these two team styles we are going to separate into two categories, which are named after the players that most pioneered that style. So the first style is the Heist style, which you can see here. This was the lineup, one of the earliest Clefable lineups, in fact, that Heist used for a long time. You might know him by his newer name, Babidi1998, or the Grand Babito, because he changed his usernames a couple times throughout the years, but they're all the same guy, and I like to refer to him as Heist because it's easiest. Anyway, so this is Style 1, which is Hard Stall, Blissey plus Clefable, and the second style is the Jirachi style. Now, Jirachi with two E's as opposed to an I. So, the original was the Heist style is Hard Stall, which is where Blissey is most at home, but Jirachi's style, which you can see in this RMT, is that of a Blissey offense. For players who are familiar with the idea of Chansey offense and newer gens, this is similar. But you might be thinking, well, why Blissey on offense? What does that do? And why wouldn't I use Clefable instead? Well, we will absolutely get to that. But I want to start with the Heist style, because that is more intuitive. Because when you think Blissey, you think Stall. So, in a sense, it seems very natural to pair Blissey with Clefable, because you think, oh, well, Clefable can't do some things Blissey can, but Clefable is also really good overall, so why don't I just use both? So the idea behind the double pink Blob stall is that against offensive teams, then Blissey will handle the special attackers that Clefable can't, and against the defensive teams that Clefable cannot handle, or the defensive teams that Blissey is not very good against, besides getting rocks, then Clefable with a Calm Mindset will take over and threaten to sweep. Calm Mind, Soft Boiled, Thunderbolt, Ice Beam. Bolt Max. So that's the general idea. So now you're thinking, well, okay, Blissey sounds nice for its defensive utility, but Clefable's generally handling things better. Well, other than Blissey being able to... Blissey running rocks means that Clefable can run Calm Mind more freely. But is that really worth using Blissey when you said, well, Clefable handles things like Lava Plume Heatran and Toxic Zapdos? How is that worth it? Well, Clefable is good against the more mid-range attackers of the tier. That's very true. So things like offensive Heatran without a boost, offensive Zapdos, even Latias, because it doesn't take hazard damage, it heals in sand, doesn't take status damage. Even something like a Leech Seed Shaman is generally more easily dealt with by Clefable. However, what Clefable lacks is the ability to take on the truly powerful special attackers of the tier. And this is readily exploited by a lot of really strong offense teams in the current metagame. Those teams that say, all right, well, Clefable is annoying, but it just cannot match, it cannot hope to stand up to the power of these special attackers. And it's not like Clefable can just turn to its other 13 special walling teammates to pick up the slack. It certainly gets some help, yes, of course. The most common example being something like Special Defensive Jirachi or Bronzong and Scarf T-Tar helping out against a Gengar. But I'm not talking about Gengar necessarily, because Gengar can be annoying for Blissey too. But I'm talking more about boosted special attackers. So we're going to go down by the ranks. First of all, a Calm Mind Jirachi is already annoying for Clefable. Now you might think, well, Substitute and Wish Calm Mind Jirachi beat Blissey. Yeah, that's very true, they do. But Blissey is able to... Okay, first of all, Blissey being able to T-Wave Sub Calm Mind, or Wish Calm Mind Jirachi helps a lot in letting the rest of your team deal with it without putting your Clefable in harm's way. A lot of what we're going to be exploring here is Blissey and Clefable keeping one or the other out of harm's way. And I have a couple of replays I'm going to be going over in this video as well to illustrate these examples. But for Sub Calm Mind, Wish Calm Mind, then you could say either T-Wave Blob can deal with those better. Something like a knockoff or an Encore Clefable can help with that more. But a Sub Calm Mind Jirachi is going to run over nearly every single Clefable variant. Very few questions asked. It needs Encore to stand a chance. So Blissey doesn't necessarily destroy Sub Calm Mind Jirachi, but it certainly takes a lot less damage and can feasibly Seismic Toss it down, healing off its hits. I mean, it's got to watch out for Psychic drops, but it certainly is better than the vast majority of Clefable variants. And when you consider how many teams need Clefable to run rocks, then you can see just how nasty Sub Calm Mind Jirachi can be against them, especially because Sub Calm Mind Jirachi takes advantage of those kinds of teams. The Rocks Clefable, the specially defensive Jirachi. Special defensive Jirachi doesn't help out much in that regard. Scarf T-Tar isn't helping much in that regard. So it can be supported nicely, and of course you definitely can make up for this deficit with something like an Earthquake Scarf T-Tar or a Roar Latias, but Blissey helps out against Calm Mind Jirachi in a major way, and not just the bulky sets. What about the Super Rachi variants? A non-T-Wave Clefable gets completely destroyed by an offensive Calm Mind Jirachi. It can't keep up. It's just going to get trucked by Psychic, and it's certainly not going to be able to knock off, Seismic Toss and Soft Boiled Stall it the way Blissey completely sits on it. The sheer bulk of Blissey really, really helps. I mean, let's take the Heist team. If you just put a T-Tar or a Jirachi, or a specially defensive Jirachi, or even something like a Bronzong over the Blissey here, then you would still have a very good team, but you would be a lot worse against several special attackers, and many variants of Calm Mind Jirachi would be among them, such as the HP Fire Super Rachi. I mean, it would just slice through most of this team unimpeded. So you have to keep that in mind. But it's not just the Calm Mind Jirachi, because you might think, Oh, well, that doesn't sound so bad. That's generally doable. And yeah, I would agree with you. But, Jirachi is fairly soft as far as special attackers go, and we're just going by viability. So the next Pokemon on this list makes it way worse. Heatran. Specs Heatran, Blissey, doesn't shrug off Overheat, but it takes under 50%, whereas Clefable, not so much. So let's take a gander at Specs Tran's Overheat against Blissey. So 40 to 47, that's a lot of damage. You'll have to soft boil that off. And let's take a look at how the bulkiest Clefable does against it. Oh, yikes. Yeah, 73 minimum. Yeah, you are not eating this, ever. You'll beat it one-on-one, probably. Except maybe you won't, because if it has Flamethrower, like most of them do, then it threatens to 2 KO you. And, you can knock it off. If you can... Look, I'm obviously exaggerating a little, because, stuff like Knock Off and T-Wave can help play around it, but it's a lot less safe than what Blissey offers. Blissey offers eternally walling this. And there's also the fact that Clefable can't even switch into the Flamethrower. Now, you might say, oh, well, Clefable... what Clefable lacks in sheer bulk, it makes up for with its ability to navigate its way around all the chip damage that permeates the DPP landscape. And yes, that's absolutely true. That's why Clefable is so good and so popular, and Blissey is more niche nowadays. However, there's no denying just how useful this is, because one of the major ways that these Clefable-only stall teams, or semi-stall teams, or balance teams, or whatever you want to call them, a lot of how they handle special attackers relies on predicting around the stronger ones, because you're certainly not going to wall them like you can with Blissey. And Blissey's a good Pokemon to have on this kind of team. The rocks are extremely reliable, which you always like, because you're going to get a million opportunities per game. You're going to completely destroy Starmie, so spinning isn't going to be an option. You can spread T-Wave for your teammates, you can Toxic, you can even Ice Beam to hit subbing ghost types. You can go with Wish for... Oh, that's even better. So, and you free up slots in your Clefable, it's really nice. Now, Blissey doesn't necessarily have to be paired with Clefable, but these are just some of the benefits. So we're going to keep going over those special attackers. Here's another one, Starmie. Specs Starmie crushes Clefable. Again, not one-on-one or anything, that would be ridiculous. But there's Specs. Yeah, that's max special defense Clefable. Clefable does tend to hang around at full HP a lot, but yikes, you need Protect to... not just die most of the time. Not to mention, most Clefable can't really afford to run max. They like some defense EVs. And as soon as you start taking out of Spadef, then whoops, that starts getting really nasty. The highest you're generally going to see is around 240, and generally it's going to be a lot lower. So let's say something like 216, and even this is higher than what most of them do, and then what most of the Clefable variants nowadays run. So yeah. 70%, and as soon as you go down to, let's be generous and say 184, yikes. So, Spec Starmie, yeah. Let's look at how Blissey does against it. Oh, 15% to 40 KO after lefties. And I realize there's things like sand and, rocks, but, even with sand and rocks, 36.7% chance of 3 KO with rocks and sandstorm, so... And you might think, oh, well, Trick and the whole point is that on this stall team, Blissey is protecting your Clefable. Blissey is taking all the abuse possible, so your Clefable can remain in pristine condition to ward off that DD Gyarados or Dragonite, to ward off that Gliscor, to ward off that Heatran, the lava pluming variant that annoys Blissey with the spikes up. The point is that Blissey reinforces Clefable here. It's not, you really cannot replicate what Blissey's defensive capability, not its literal defense stat, what it does for Clefable here with anything else. The Jirachi, T-Tar, Zong, I mean, you still have a very good team if you put those Pokemon over Blissey, but in terms of, and like if you placed a Latias over Nidoqueen, if you did something like that, then yeah, that would help. But it certainly wouldn't be ideal, considering that even something like a Latias, yeah, can take Specs Hydros, but, Specs Ice Beam and then you're toast, or Specs Dragon Pulse from Heatran and you're also toast. So by running Latias and then a different Pokemon over Blissey, then you have the opportunity to play around them more easily, but you also, well, in addition to giving up Nidoqueen's benefits, which not as important, you're giving yourself the opportunity to play around those dangerous special attackers as opposed to just hard countering them and not worrying about it. Because when you are forced to play around dangerous special attackers like that with a slow, bulky team, you are really just waiting to lose, because by virtue of being a slow, bulky team that plays reactively for the most part, then you are going to give the opponent a lot of opportunities. And I don't care how good you are at predicting, you are not going to get it every single time, especially when it's generally very low risk for the opponent to predict as well, and very high risk for you. So Blissey's defensive capability on this kind of team is nasty. I've been testing this style myself recently. I've been using Latias over Nidoqueen, but I've kept the Blissey, because I think the water resist and the backup fire resist for things like Band and Fernape is generally more useful on than Nidoqueen's qualities nowadays, although I still like Nidoqueen. But the water resist is really helpful for things like offensive Swampert and Gyarados, so I do like Latias over Nidoqueen nowadays. But the Blissey, the whole point of this team, the team when I was putting it together, inspired by this one, was to make use of Blissey's defensive qualities. It cannot be replaced. So, some other special attackers that it can take on. Oh yeah, Latias, same deal as Starmie. Because, again, max special defense Clefable can ward these special attackers off decently, besides Specs Heatran. But it also, fears... That means it's not running more defense EVs and having to do all the work itself, which it very often has to, is really tough. And having that unwavering wall against these attackers is just wonderful. Even just having to use your Clefable less makes it so much more dangerous when it does come out. So, especially because when Clefable takes on attackers like these, it has to use Soft Boiled, or else it can't take them on again. Whereas Blissey shrugs them off and keeps going, and not necessarily needing to Soft Boiled, so it can continue to harass the opponent's offensive team with Thunder Wave, or throw up a wish for its teammates, that kind of thing. Blissey's higher bulk, significantly higher special bulk, allows it to be more active when dealing with these dangerous special attackers, which makes the team it's on less passive, which makes it harder to deal with. And that, of course, is while protecting Clefable from it. So, you can see the benefits. If I'm unclear, then please ask in the comments and I'll happily clarify, but I think I'm explaining the idea of it very well. The idea of it, very well phrased. The idea of why Blissey is so key and so difficult to truly replace the full effect of on these teams. So, some other special attackers. Oh, Zapdos. Zapdos forces Clefable to soft-boiled easily. Blissey, nah. Here's a big one, Empoleon. A ton of Clefable stall teams hate Empoleon. The Sub-Pataya set will just... No, I just knocked something over in my enthusiasm for explaining just how hard Blissey walls Empoleon. It's okay, it's nothing important. But yeah, I cannot stress enough how terrified most Clefable teams are of Sub-Pataya Empoleon, or even a Specs Empoleon, because that way they can't even use Haze Milo because it just gets grass knotted. So, whereas Blissey completely sits on it. Absolutely, entirely, completely sits on it. And I can't stress how, Empoleon is a Pokemon you have a really hard time replicating the defensive qualities of Blissey against. Especially defensive Jirachi, Latias, not great. It's pretty much just have Milotic, and even then, that's not exactly comforting because it still hits hard if it's running 3 attacks Grass Knot, and, God forbid, Specs. So Blissey, shrug it off. Look, even something like an offensive Suicune, which doesn't seem like a stall killer until your special walls are Milotic, non-T-Wave Clefable. Again, Clefable can't always fit what it wants. It can't always fit T-Wave, can't always fit max special defense. So when your special walls are Milotic, special defense Jirachi, and a non-T-Wave Clefable, then offensive Suicune gets really scary really, really fast. So, Blissey, no, nothing to be fearful of. Specs Kingdra and Rain Dance Kingdra, but especially Specs, the same deal. Same deal as Empoleon, same deal as Suicune. It's just like Empoleon, except it has a really fearful stab that's easier to spam, and it's not weak to Magnezone, so you can't play around it like that. But yeah, Specs Draco, nuts, and you don't want Jirachi switching into those Specs Hydros. And Blissey does not care. Blissey just sits on it all day. So those are the big ones. Even something like Life Orb Shaman, rare as that is, but or Raikou. Basically, being able to, those Clefable and Jirachi are very good at staying healthy. They're very good at staying in the high tip-top condition they need to be in order to check things like Raikou, and that means they're less susceptible. But that means if they do not remain in utterly pristine condition, which is rare but can be forced by an enterprising, talented offensive player, then that means they are potentially very vulnerable to getting run over by random, even something like a Zapdos, which you might think you're fine against, and you usually will be, but it's a lot easier to, it's a lot harder to break through Blissey with something like a Zapdos, like just through offensive force alone, because defensive Jirachi running a lot of defense EVs, and Clefable has to soft wheel off Thunderbolt, so U-turn chip here and there, and suddenly Zapdos is scaring you, whereas Blissey is just constantly walling it for days and days and days. And of course, Blissey is not going to do everything itself because of its vulnerability, but that's where your backup steps in. Clefable is still great against these Pokemon. It just doesn't want to do all the work itself because that is not as reliable. And with Blissey, then of course, you are good to go here. So, now, of course, you were going to say, all right, well, these are two slow, physically frail Pokemon. And I'm going to say, look, they're a lot less physically frail than you might think. I mean, Clefable takes banded D-Knight Outrage, with health to spare, and, takes 2 +1 Gyarados Waterfalls almost all the time. So it's bulky. But yeah, of course, I get it. The close combat weakness is pretty devastating here. That's why there are 3 of the bulkiest fighting resists around, and Rotom, Gliscor, Nidoqueen, and of course a Skarmory. So you got your 2 big special walls, special tanks. Then you've got 4 incredibly useful physical defensive Pokemon. And even if you're using Latias over Nidoqueen like I am, then that can easily be EV'd to go bold or just a lot of defense EVs, so you can take those close combats. So yeah, it's something to look out for, of course, but it's nothing that can't be made up for with some good team building. So, in a nutshell, with this style, then Blissey protects the whole team against those special attackers that would be devastating to deal with otherwise. It saves them move slots as well. I mean, especially if you're running Wish, that's so incredibly useful. And gets up the rock, so you don't have to stick them on Skarmory or Nidoqueen. So and the special attacking reinforcement, especially defensive reinforcement, cannot be overemphasized. So, alright, so now that we've mentioned the Blissey Stall variant, then we gotta go over to the actually, no. Before we go over to the Blissey offense, I want to go over some replays to illustrate this idea. So this first replay is from like it's 2015. Yeah. So this is when the style was when Clefable was still making its name, but this is the team we have just been talking about exactly, and it's gonna do exactly what we talked about. So I zoomed in a little too early there. That'll do. Okay, so we're not dissecting these games necessarily. So there's Shaman, offensive Shaman, because it's a very offensive team. I mean, look at that. Offensive Shaman, you can generally play around, but can be annoying if you're relying on using Clefable against it. And look at that. Shaman just crit a Seed Flare and did 40 to Blissey. It doesn't care. It could crit again and it'd probably be fine, and Blissey would be fine. Without Sand, of course, but even in Sand, Clefable gets crit and by a special... When Clefable gets crit by a special attack, then, you know, it's usually out of commission because if it's low speed. Blissey gets crit by a special attack and it just keeps on trucking. At worst, it has to soft-boiled it off. So there are the rocks, and Sap let his Sapientia, I'm not calling the guy a Sap, let his arrow get T-waved, so that's not really something to analyze, but just wanted to illustrate Blissey's capabilities, which this game does a great job at doing. So, okay, here's some more. So now we've got more special attackers going on. So there's Rotom, and there's Empoleon. So if this Blissey was a Bronzong, a Scarftar, a special defensive Jirachi, lights out. This was pre-Latias drop, by the way, so there's no chance of Latias on either team. But, you know, good night. So he's got to go to D-Knight to stave off the Blissey, but, you know, that's fine. That's going to be irritating, but nothing unmanageable. So Gliscor, Walling, and Sab makes some good moves here, takes that out. Heist is trying to guard his Blissey from getting tricked, and look at how irritating the Blissey is to switch into. And look, he even gets to go on the offensive here with Clefable. You know, from the pure defensive Blissey to the actually offensive, threatening nature of Clefable, because Bolt Beam with Rocks and Spikes down is actually a pain. So, yeah, and now look what happens here. Rotom gets tricked, and, well, look at that. He's still fine, because he's still got... he gets to spam the T-Wave on it. He can now deal with it with his Clefable, and the Blissey has reinforced his defenses well enough to stand up to this onslaught of the Trick Rotom, the Shaman, the Empoleon. My god, the Empoleon. As you can probably tell, I am terrified of Empoleon. It's one of the scariest Pokemon in the metagame. So you need to be as safe against it as you possibly can, especially with the stall team that's going to give it a lot of opportunity. And Blissey, I mean, even when tricked and at half health, then Blissey is still incredibly valuable. Just because it's going to stave off that Empoleon later on. It's going to let Heist play around it, and then let his Clefable play around it as well. So, he doesn't actually do that because he decides to sacrifice it, but his, if he had run a faster Gliscor, which he probably should have. Come on. Why am I messing with him for it? Max defense was required because Breland was such a pain. But yeah, so there's the Growth Shaman, and so look, the special attacking Onslaught is even more of a pain, but, you know, Clefable can take, I think this is just max special defense Clefable, so that's another remnant from the old days. But, I mean, look at this. You know, if Clefable had not been backed up by, Clefable had not been backed up by Blissey, I really doubt Heist wins this game. I doubt anything Bronzong, Jirachi, or Scarf T-Tar would have been able to do would have been able to save the Clefable from this onslaught of special attackers. So, yeah, Clef is really, really something. And so is Blissey. I mean, that's the whole point of this video. So, another thing Blissey can do that I want to mention is, so Clefable with a calm mindset really slices through a lot of stall teams, right? It does an absolute ton at +6, and it's easy to get +6 because nothing hurts it, but it doesn't do enough to Blissey. I mean, look at that. That's +6 Clefable Thunderbolt or Ice Beam in Sand. In Sand, that's a 4 KO, of course, and most of the time you probably will beat the Blissey, but you're going to beat the Blissey, but you are going to be really, really hard-pressed to win the whole game. I mean, unless you're critting left and right. Even if you're critting left and right, because look at how much a crit does. You know, 50 to 60. So, I mean, you have a lot of attacking PP. I mean, Ice Beam is 16, I think, and Thunderbolt is 24. So and Blissey, of course, only has 16 soft builds, and that's if it starts with 16. But its ability to sit on Clefable is really helpful. It gives you another way of playing around one of the most dangerous threats to these stall teams. So, and if you have Wish, then that's even better, because you have more recovery. You have 32 now, And plus, while you are taking these hits, you are not just sitting around doing nothing. Seismic Toss has 32 PP, and Clefable has 16 soft boileds. And I'm not saying you're going to beat it one-on-one, but you are going to burn a lot of its PP away, because it's not going to, by the time it finishes the encounter with Blissey, even if it's one, it's going to have lost a ton of attacking PP, and if not more importantly, it's going to have lost a ton of soft boileds, an absolute ton, because its HP is not that huge. It's 394. I mean, it's huge. It's big. It's getting the job done against pretty much everything. But when you have to take as many as many seismic tosses as you are going to when you are face to face with a Blissey, I mean, you're probably going to have to take all 32. So you are going to be left with, very low in the single digits once you're done with it. So Blissey being able to, it's not a Calm Mind Clef counter. You can't slap Blissey on your team and go, okay, I'm good against Calm Mind Clef, but it definitely helps. So, and it's not just Calm Mind Clef that it helps against. The current metagame has been leaning more and more towards sandless teams, as players really enjoy what not having sand around does for their Latias, their defensive Latias, and various other Pokemon like Breloom. And as a result, you don't count on there not being sand, but it's definitely a nice benefit that if there is no sand and Blissey faces off with a Clefable, then this is also Heister, Babidi. This is from this past year. It's from February 2020. So, still using Blissey here. So if worse comes to worse, you can, again, this time Clefable's hurting you even less, because Seismic Toss against a Pokemon with over 700 HP is not doing a lot, and Blissey's going to Seismic Toss you as well. Even if you're knocking it off, even if there's sand, then in that one-on-one, then Blissey can stall Clefable. So if the opposing balance or stall team's only way of really hurting Blissey is to sit on it with Clefable, then you are fine with taking that trade, because the Blissey is going to drain the Clefable of a ton of its important moves. So, it's weird, because when you think of Clefable and dealing with stall teams, one of the things you think about is, oh, if you see a Blissey, you just sit on it. And, don't get me wrong, knocking off a Blissey and, chipping it down with hazards and sand, that is annoying. But if you can deal with those hazards, like here we see Heist has a Fortress in an attempt to deal with those, then if the opponent has been worn down to the point where Clefable is trying to muscle its way through everything, which is definitely feasible for a lot of stall teams without Blissey. Even knockoff support Clefable is a threat. Knockoff Stealth Rock Clefable is a threat to a lot of defensive teams, because they can't hurt it and it chips them down really hard. But Blissey's huge HP gets in the way of that. So, we're not going to watch this whole game because it's almost 200 turns long. I just wanted it playing. So, Clefable is annoying here, but as the game goes on, then actually we're just going to skip to the end. So, so the idea is that your Blissey team will be able to wear down the other Pokemon on Clefable's team. And then when Clefable is making its last stand, its heroic attempt to make its way through, then Blissey sits on it, because look, here we see the Clefable has a ton of PP left, but it realizes it's not going to break through this Blissey reliably, as well as Heist's other Pokemon, mainly because Heist just spams Stealth Rock, and that makes it lose a lot of Seismic Toss PP if it ever actually wants to damage the Blissey, and it can heal that off, whenever it wants. So, yeah, here you can see all its moves and Clefable's as well. So, yeah. Alright, so now that we have covered what Blissey does for the Clefable stall teams, oh, look at Heist's team here. It doesn't even have the Clef. So, I want to mention that Blissey is not solved. Let's say, like I said in my DragMag video recently, I really don't like that term with Pokemon, but I use it because it's how it might make sense for a lot of people, and that's an ad. But I mention it because it goes to show that there's still a lot of room for experimentation with Blissey in DPP. And I hope this video inspires, some, even if you're an experienced player and you know what this, all the stuff I'm talking about, maybe it'll inspire you to go, hey, you know what, I'm going to give Blissey another try. I think it can do some real good for my team. So, this is just on stall, by the way. We're just getting started. So Blissey on stall absolutely has potential. I mean, you could say, yeah, Heist team would benefit from a Clef, and yeah, it would, but at the same time, look at the special walling there. I mean, even with Doug Trio helping out, something as simple as a Zapdos would be really annoying for this team. A 3-attack Zapdos against Jirachi, Zap, Celebi, Fori, Doug, and then, you got Clef dealing it with its max special attack Thunderbolts. I mean, especially if it's Magnet. Oh, no thanks. So, I mean, even if it doesn't have Heat Wave, because it'll have U-Turn instead, so, yikes. Blissey, on the other hand, no, it's gonna stand unwaveringly. So that's what I'm talking about. That's the kind of potential there still is for this Pokemon to... Like, I really doubt it overtakes Clefable. That would truly astonish me. That's not going to happen. I would bet on that. But, and if anyone wants to take me up on that, then, I'm always glad to make a couple extra bucks, so please. But the point is that while it's not going to overtake Clefable, it certainly has its place as a top-tier Pokemon, and people kind of sleep on it a little bit, but the higher HP and the higher bulk than Clefable really does come into play in so many relevant scenarios, as we have already gone over with the viability ranks and all the other ranting I've just done. So now we're going to go take a look at the second approach, the Jirachi approach. So this is the offensive form of Blissey. We're not talking max speed choice band or something, but fitting Blissey on an offensive team. So this is not the most novel concept because, and everything I am showing on screen in this video, I will also be linking in the description. But yeah, the idea is that Blissey on offensive teams is not a novel concept, especially if you are familiar with Advanced OU. It's very good there, and in like Oris, it's okay, and in Sun and Moon, Chansey on offense is actually quite good. But in DPP, then yeah, absolutely, it's terrific. So what does Blissey do for a team like this? Well, an offensive team obviously wants to have a lot of powerhouses that can smack the opponent around, and Jirachi's team is full of those. It's got a Specs Heatran, which is an absolute nuke. Even a defensive Zapdos is still an offensive threat. And then you've got your big bad Breloom, and then you got your defensive core, and that's fine. And you would say, oh, well, Clefable seems nice on this kind of team, and yeah, it's been experimented with. And that Zapdos slot is, open to experimentation. For example, I've made some similar teams with the Choice Band Dragonite over Zapdos, and I used that a long time ago, and it was effective because it performed a similar task of checking fighting types, while also absorbing sleep from Breloom, and it was another big nuke, just like Heatran. You got your Choice Band Heatran as nuke number 1, and then nuclear weapon number 2 is your Choice Band Dragonite. So when you use big, strong Pokemon like this, your defensive core is not going to be as solid as that of a stall team. Of course, that is a given. So I'm not even saying that you need Blissey on this kind of team. Yeah, you can use a Rox, T-Tar, or Clefable, or whatever, but being able to switch into the opponent's attacks so freely is a major leg up in offense-on-offense matchups, because a lot of times offense-on-offense games can be very volatile, very KO tradey, let's call them, when you get in your big hitter and then you smack their Pokemon for a KO, and then they come back in and you're forced to sacrifice something else before you do the same over and over and over. And that kind of KO race can be very tough to navigate sometimes, especially with good prediction on both sides. And what Blissey does is, let's say that you've got a Specs Heatran and you just overheated something, right? And let's pretend there's no Blissey here, and you've got a T-Tar or a Clefable instead. And after Heatran comes in, or destroys something with overheat, then a Specs Kingdra comes in, and you have nothing to switch into it, because your water resists are Breloom and Starmie, and both of them, well, Breloom gets 2 KO by Specs Hydro, and Starmie gets completely obliterated by Draco Meteor, and you're not switching your Draco Meteor resist into a Specs Hydro because, good night. So either of your Draco Meteor resists, you're not keeping Heatran in there. So, well, that was funny. In that scenario, then you are just sacrificing Pokemon left and right. But when you have a Blissey, you just go, oh, okay, well, now I got my free KO, and now I prevent him from doing anything because my Blissey will completely sit on his Specs Kingdra, or his Empoleon, or his Zapdos, on and on and on and on. Whereas something like a Clefable or a T-Tar would have more pressure, but on a team with something like a Specs Heatran and a Breloom forcing something to sleep before it goes on an offensive rampage itself, then you are not really lacking in offensive pressure here. I mean, sure, you can make little tweaks to be more threatening, but as a whole, your offense is fine. Your defense is what needs shoring up. Even offensive teams need defense. I mean, unless you are running a Stealth Rock, Suicide Lead, +5 setup sweepers kind of team, you are going to need some sort of defensive core. You are going to need to be able to switch into attacks because your team's pace is not so screamingly fast that you are not going to never be switching. You are not going to be running Pokemon that are so fast and so strong that they just overwhelm the opponent easily on a game-to-game basis without ever being stopped by anything. That would be a way different metagame. So you are going to need a defensive core. And for the most part, offensive teams are fine with being forced to play around things. I mean, this style of team, the Heatran, Zapdos, T-Tar, Breloom, Starmie, Jirachi, with one filler one way or another, that's still a great team. That absolutely is. It's one of the most famous offensive styles in DPP. But when you put a Blissey on there, then you still have all your offense, but you lose a little bit of offense, obviously, but the added defensive utility is just incredible. So I have really enjoyed using this team and variants of it. So have a lot of other players. It's seen a ton of tournament success. And when players think Blissey nowadays, I think this is the style that is more readily available in players' minds, let's say, because Blissey is... when you think of Blissey and you want to put it on a stall team, you are naturally going to default to Clefable and friends most of the time. That's fine, because when you are talking about defensive styles, then you are naturally going to have an inclination towards the Milotic, Jirachi, Latias, Clefable style, the Scarf T-Tar helping you play around everything, and that's fine. Blissey Clefable stall is, it's good, but it's also fairly rigid. Now, Blissey offense, on the other hand, that has a lot of potential for experimentation, because when you're using Blissey stall nowadays, you are pretty much... I mean, look, you are, as Heist's team here, the Clefable less Blissey stall, the first one we've seen in years and years and years, there's still potential, but at the same time, you are still pigeonholed into running a very bulky, very defensive, very reactive team, whereas the options for using Blissey on offense are a lot more vast. I mean, this is the generally accepted structure that we have seen in the last several years of Blissey offense. Specs Heatran is a fixture, and then your guys like Zapdos, and over Scarf Jirachi, I really enjoy Scarf Metagross. And then your Choice Band D-Knight, or you can throw in a Latias there if you like. You can throw in a more offensive Zapdos. You can do a whole bunch of things. You can throw in Machamp over Breloom, stuff like that. But the point is that Blissey on offense allows you to be more flexible because you are suddenly a lot more free to run every big, huge, strong wall breaker you can think of without as much of the consequence of, oh, but now I can't switch into things. Like, for example, when you want to run Choice Band T-Tar, but you really want to run Pasho Berry because otherwise you're going to lose to all the offensive waters flying around, then you can slap on Blissey, and there you go. Now you can run your DD or Choice Band Tar in peace. So, that's the kind of freedom we're talking about here, and that's a lot less restrictive than the stall chords that Blissey is going to find itself on. Like, even if you're trying to experiment a little and you're breaking away from the Blissey Clefable mold, like Heist did there, like let's say if you're running some old school Gyarados 4 stuff, I mean, it's still going to be a very stallish core, no matter what you come up with. Whereas the options for offense are a lot vaster. I mean, options for offense are always pretty vast, but they are a lot more vast when you have such a good defensive Pokemon to fall back on. And plus, there's also the fact that Blissey is not just so good at running, walling all these dangerous threats, but it also has Stealth Rock. So, like, a huge example of this would be offensive Swampert is really, really dangerous, but it really wishes it could run a fourth offensive move a lot, and it usually can't because it's got to run Stealth Rock. But when you have Blissey on your team, then you can go wild with that Choice Band or that 4-attack Lefties Pert or even that Choice Specs Pert or 3 attacks Protect, whatever you like. So, having Stealth Rock on such a bulky Pokemon is just amazing. And yeah, you can do similar things with things like bulky Stealth Rocking Jirachi, but it's just not going to have the same level of wallage, let's call it, against those offensive waters, those Zapdoses, those Heatrans. It's just very, very difficult to replicate, and there's a lot of options. So I want to go over some. So this is a team I made a long time ago, and it's similar. It's got Specs Heatran, and it is an example of the Blissey offense style. And this is what I was talking about with the Specs Heatran and the Band Dragonite. I mean, you are not going to be able to pull off Specs Heatran Band Dragonite on a lot of teams just because, as strong as they are, that hole in your defenses is very, very noticeable. I mean, like, Heatran and Dragonite are naturally good defensively because of their bulk and resistances, and you're always going to have to play around things. But when you have two of your biggest sources of offense both being choiced, then you are naturally going to give up a lot of dangerous turns, a lot of free turns to opposing Pokemon that can quickly become very dangerous because they're quickly dangerous because you don't have such a solid response to them. So, an Agility Empoleon at the wrong time is really scary. Or the aforementioned Kingler example. Kingler's one of the scariest Pokemon to deal with here. So, I also want to mention in this game that Zapdos completely unafraid of Blissey. Or sorry, other way around, Blissey completely unafraid of Zapdos. But yeah, so Clefable, I mean, I experimented with a Clefable version, of course, and I originally had Machamp over Breloom, but Blissey really made this team what it was. Where else am I gonna be? How else am I gonna run the double big choiced duo of death? Because once again, it reinforces those defenses like very little else. And here's Dragonite doing what it does. So come in over and over and over again, and it really enjoys. Even offensive teams sometimes enjoy being able to play at a slower pace because Pokemon like Heatran and Dragonite, they're not setting up. It's not a DD night, so they don't enjoy having to get every single turn correctly. They don't enjoy having to be very precise with their play because that means there's more room for error. Every single turn matters more, and they prefer when Blissey can slow down the game a little bit, and they will thus be able to pick their spots more often. Like, for example, when I Seismic Tossed against... Actually, no, I didn't know it didn't have Roost. Even then, I might have wanted to double switch as Breloom would have come in, because those switches to take advantage of Blissey are very, very telegraphed, and that can be exploited with good play. So if you have to go to your Breloom because it's your safest option to switch into a Blissey because CB Tar will get T-Waved, then you should be able to take advantage of that with your Heatran, your Dragonite. So, yeah, I mean, my Blissey dies here to 2 Choice Band T-Tar Pursuits. Good moves from Posho, but it got the job done. And more importantly, it's not just how it performed in this one game, but it's the fact that it facilitated the team around it as well as it possibly could have. So, And if it wasn't Clefable, if it wasn't Blissey, then I was a lot more afraid of Zapdos instantly because of how it can force. Like, let's say Zapdos just uses T-Bolt and Clefable comes in. I got a soft boiled. The next time it comes in, and it is going to come in, then I am, going to lose something. Whereas Blissey does not it's not threatened at all. It just pops up Stealth Rock, and that's what you want. So it absolutely could not have been the team's structure, composition, whatever you want to call it, could not have been facilitated by any other Pokemon. So anyway, and I want to show one other example of a game I had with a more updated version of this team, of Jirachi's team. And this is actually in my downloads folder, so I have to change these again. Anyway, so here I want to show what Blissey's bulk is capable of. So this is me using the updated version of Jirachi's team with the Scarf Metagross over Jirachi, because I love Scarf Metagross and it's amazing. Anyway, so here at first you're thinking, uh-oh, well, you got the T-Spikes, and Bliss and Clefable wouldn't mind those, which is definitely true, but at the same time, it's also... Clefable wouldn't mind those, but it's also so... The special attackers T-Spikes are paired with are... they would need those T-Spikes to get past Blissey, but even then, it's not instantly dying to them. And those special attackers are also powerful enough to where Clefable would be quaking in its boots against them. So... here's a prime example. I believe that is a Super Jirachi, an offensive Calm Mind Jirachi, and it will not get past Breloom at all. I mean, I get rid of the T-Spikes. That's what this team's supposed to do, and Breloom that was a lucky crit, but Breloom was beating Gengar there since it switched in. And now look, Rock's T-Wave Clef is not a good set. When you're running support Clefable, you need Knockoff. Knockoff is what makes Clefable what it is. And that, in conjunction with its lesser bulk, means that it was going to have a lot harder of a time against any form of Calm Mind Jirachi, as we have established. And here I can just S-Toss, and see, Calm Mind Protect here. That's nasty. Whereas those boosted Psychics would be pressuring Clefable hard, and could Calm Mind again on my soft wheels and hit me even harder, and I'm not punishing it enough. And even a non-T-Wave Blissey is generally going to come out on top against this Jirachi. So, that was a good move on my part. Thanks, me. So, yeah. Now, so here's an even better example of what Blissey does. Magma Heatran is famous for completely destroying Clefable, because it just can't stand up to those powerful Magma Storms. And look what Blissey does here. It switches into a Magma Heatran. It's not even at full health. It's a Blissey at, 90%, but still 90%. Imagine if Clefable was at 90%. That'd be even worse. And, switches into the Magma Heatran, gets taunted, doesn't really care, just going to keep, Magma Stormed and taunted, and it's just going to keep bringing it down, and Magma Storm doesn't last too long. So, freed from Magma Storm, and, good night. So, yeah, that was pretty astonishing. So being able to stand up to... I mean, if T-Spikes were down, that'd be something else, and that's the idea that the style of team really... Your Blissey team needs to be aware of T-Spikes in some capacity. So for this team, then, Scarf... EQ Metagross is very good backup against these dangerous special attackers, so it means that even if the T-Spikes went down, then I would not be toast. But at the same time, Blissey would still be a good switch-in to these Pokemon. It would still be able to thwart them from immediately putting me on the defensive, because even when Blissey comes into a Super Jirachi as it Calm Minds at half health, Blissey is not on the defensive. It's on the offensive. I mean, I softboil because I can afford to, but I very easily could have just thrown out a Seismic Toss or a T-Wave and still been just fine. So, T-Wave on Blissey is generally the safest, but yeah. Also, offense really enjoys when they have reliable Stealth Rock against Starmie, because when the opposing team is relying on Starmie to keep rocks off and use that to reinforce their defensive core, then it's generally nice when you are able to force the opposing Zapdos to take damage, which is especially huge in the case of Breloom, because so many of its checks, like Zapdos and Dragonite, are Stealth Rock weak. So when you are able to force Stealth Rock up even against that spinner, then that is invaluable. So it's a major part of what makes Stealth Rock Clef so good, and Blissey is similarly effective. And here, Blissey could have soloed, but I didn't really need to do that because I was winning anyway with Breloom. So yeah, so that was that, and we have one more game to show, and it's actually kind of special because it is both the originators of these two styles I've mentioned against each other. This was for DPP Cup, I believe, in like round 4 or something in 2017. And Babidi 1998 is Heist, and Schoolboy P is Jirachi, and they are using their respective styles of Blissey team against each other. And it was the deciding game 3 of the series too, so it was pretty exciting. So here's Blissey. Look at that, Spextran 40 with Overheat. That's astonishing. You can just pop up rocks here. And now Blissey into Blissey. This is the kind of DPP. That's my kind of metagame. So Blissey, not great against 4 one-on-one. It could beat it one-on-one for sure, but he decides to go to Breloom instead. So we're not analyzing the game again, but we're just analyzing because that's not what this video is about. And look, keeping the rocks up is generally nice for Breloom. So Roar Zapdos, definitely more annoying for Blissey since it can get worn down with rocks and spikes. And Clefable would be preferable there, for sure. Now, again, I'm not saying Blissey is always better than Clef. And that's why I'm showing these games as they are instead of making excuses or cherry picking. Because, yeah, of course, Clefable is going to be preferred there. Against the defensive team, then yes, of course you're going to want Clefable. But at the same time, then Blissey's effectiveness is still on display here. I mean, that Spextran thing, good lord. Because you're not going to get many better special walls than Blissey against Specs Heatran. So when you're not running Blissey, then you're usually weak to Specs Heatran in some capacity, and that's what a lot of offensive teams right now take advantage of. So, yeah. More stuff going on. The Scarftar goes down. Scarftar always good. Special offensive backup. Scarftar and Doug. So, I think the style of team would still be... Well, Doug is probably on its way out. Depending on when you're watching this. Hopefully, if you're watching this after the first couple weeks it's been out, then Doug is gone. But yeah, so Zapdos, a lot less threat. Also, Zapdos is a lot more threatened by Blissey than Clefable would be. So he's making the moves. He's got to make the double switches to take advantage of that. So, of course, Clefable's longevity in the face of rocks and sand would be very valuable in this game, but yeah, that's just another example of just how nasty it is. So, another thing Blissey can do, come in at half health and just soft-wheeled easily on the flamethrower-locked Specs Heatran. Again, we're not going over the specifics of what the game entailed, but yeah. That is just another example of what Blissey can do. And, it's not Clefable. Clefable would be pretty unbreakable for these defensive antics. But at the same time, Specs Heatran, yeah, he would have been able to play around it with Dugtrio, but he was losing a Pokemon to it very early on. And when Specs Heatran can poke an early hole in your defensive core, then yikes. And just imagine how the combination of Zapdos and Breloom would have been to deal with afterwards, especially with Rocks up. So, yeah, so Blissey's going to PP stall. Blissey, Zapdos doing great things ever since GSC. And, yeah, I mean, being annoyed by Leech Seed is, yeah, no way around it. It is irritating, but at the same time, once again, I want to stress that Blissey facilitated the efficacy of this team so much more than Clefable could have done. So, while it's easy to say, yeah, Clefable would have been better in this matchup, Clefable also would have made this team a lot more difficult to build. Would have been a lot more difficult for this team to work effectively against the greater metagame without Blissey. Because, yeah, this team doesn't have a ton of special attacks, but it doesn't have a ton of powerful special attacks, but, it's not the only team in the metagame. So, anyway, I just really enjoyed this game I thought it was the most fitting to end this video, this analysis. So, yeah. Thank you guys so much for... Oh, I said, oh, yeah. So, yeah, again. Damn it. But, yeah, that's Blissey for you. There's so much to explore with it. I really hope we see some more experimentation with it because it doesn't seem like a Pokemon you think, oh, this is underrated. I gotta build with it. I gotta experiment with it. But the potential is all there. It's got such a great move pool. It's got so many great, amazing defensive qualities. And I really hope we do see more of it. So thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you took something from this. Get out there, use some Blissey, push some boundaries. I will catch you all next time, and for now, I'm going to go use Blissey on the DPP ladder.